Good evening, and thank you for joining us for our FAFSA Facebook Live event and Q&A. I am Molly Gazenhouse from Kentuckiana Works College Access Center. I am the lead Educational Opportunities Center counselor there.
And I'm Lindsay Driscoll, and I am the Financial Aid Director at Jefferson Community and Technical College.
Today, we're going to be presenting the FAFSA Filing 101. Our overview includes a general overview of the free application for federal student aid, FAFSA. We're going to discuss what you need to have in order to complete the FAFSA, where you need to go to complete the FAFSA, when to complete. We're also going to discuss the IRS data retrieval tool, which is a great tool that the FAFSA uses for efficiency in gathering tax information. We'll talk about parent information. We'll also discuss what the difference between a dependent and independent student is in the eyes of the FAFSA. We'll talk about what the FAFSA does, go over some next steps after completing FAFSA, and common mistakes that students make. Before you start the FAFSA, you're going to make sure you have your Social Security number. You're going to make sure, if you are a dependent student, that you have your parents' Social Security numbers. If you are not a U.S. resident but an eligible non-resident, you will need your alien registration number. It'll be important to gather federal tax returns, including W-2 information for both you, if you're an independent student, your spouse, if you're married, and for your parents, if you're a dependent student. That federal tax information is your IRS 1040. It'll also be important to gather up any records of any untaxed income, any child support received, any veterans non-education benefits for you or your parents if you're a dependent student. And if you're an individual with a cash checking savings account, knowing those balances will be important at the end of the FAFSA. Here's a visual example of the federal 1040 U.S. income tax return for 2019. That's the current documentation that would be used for the 2021-2022 FAFSA application. There's also a visual example of what one's W-2 may look like, so a wage and tax statement that can be important, especially if you are married, filed jointly with taxes. Here is also some visual examples of that green card or I-94. The FAFSA will ask for that USCIS number on the FAFSA application, as well as an example of the Social Security card. Again, it'll be very important that all these numbers are entered incorrectly on the FAFSA, as it will make for a smoother transition and ease of processing and completion of the application. Another great thing to have before you get started on a FAFSA is an FSA ID. Your FSA ID is a username and password combination that allows you to sign the FAFSA electronically and access all studentaid.gov information. Not only does a student need an FSA ID, but also if that student is a dependent student, one of your parents will need an FSA ID. You will need, again, to create that FSA ID, you'll need a unique Social Security number, name and date of birth, as well as either a mobile phone number or email address to verify along with that information. Completing the FAFSA takes place at FAFSA.gov. FAFSA, again, stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. That application is available in both English and Spanish. You certainly want to make sure that you're at the .gov site and not a .com site, as there are some predatory websites out there that would ask that you pay to complete this application, and it is not necessary to pay anyone to assist you in completing this application. There's also a mobile app on your telephone that will allow you to get to studentaid.gov and complete the FAFSA as well. Completing the FAFSA is an application that you have to complete each year that you want to attend school. For example, the current school year we're in is the July 1, 2020 to June 30th, 2021, and you would have completed a 2020-2021 FAFSA. And as we discussed the upcoming school year, that would be someone attending school anytime between July 1st of this year to June 30th of next year. Again, that would cover the 2021-2022 FAFSA. That FAFSA opened last October, and the taxes considered for it are 2019 taxes. So if you're looking to go to school in the upcoming school year, that's the FAFSA you want to complete, the 2021-2022 FAFSA with 2019 tax information. As a reminder, it's an application that you have to renew every year, and it does open every October 1st. As a resident of state of Kentucky, the sooner you complete the application, the better, as there are state funds that may be available to you that are based on a first come, first service of completing that FAFSA. So every October 1st, renew your FAFSA.
The IRS Data Retrieval tool is a helpful tool that will allow students and parents to connect to their tax return already submitted to the IRS and have the pertinent data automatically uploaded to the FAFSA. This helpful tool prevents you from having to dig out old copies of tax returns and manually place that information on the specific lines of the FAFSA. The data retrieval tool connects with the FAFSA to gather the information needed. It is also helpful if later additional tax-related information is needed from your school's financial aid office. Less documentation may be requested from the student and the family who use this tool, since the information is already verified by the IRS. The slide shows some screenshots of how that process looks on the FAFSA website. There are certain tax filers, though, that are unable to access the IRS data retrieval tool, and those categories are outlined on this slide. They include students who do not mark on the FAFSA that the tax return is complete, a marriage date that is January 2019 or later. This is for students or parents of dependent students. The first 3 digits of the Social Security number are 666. This typically includes taxpayers from the freely associated states. That's the Republic of Palau, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, or the Federated States of Micronesia, as well as taxpayers who file a Puerto Rican tax return. If the tax return is filed as a non-U.S. tax return, you can't use the IRS data retrieval. If the student who is married or the parents of a dependent student who are married filed tax returns as head of household or filed separate returns. And finally, if in the case of a dependent student, neither married parent entered a valid Social Security number. I'm sorry, there's one more. And finally, for a dependent student, the non-married parents or both married parents entered zeros for Social Security numbers. The FAFSA requires that students must include parental information if they are considered dependent. This slide outlines the questions the FAFSA will ask to determine if a student is considered independent or dependent. For the 2021-2022 FAFSA, the questions are listed on this slide. If the student can answer yes to any of these questions, the FAFSA will consider them independent. If all answers to these questions are no, though, parental information must be included. We will go over them briefly as there's a lot of information on this slide. Were you born before January 1, 1998, or basically over the age of 24? As of today, are you married? At the beginning of the 21-22 school year, will you be working on a master's or doctorate program? Are you currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training? Are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? Do you now have, or will you have, children who will receive more than half of their support from you, basically during the academic year? Do you have dependents other than children or spouse who live with you and who receive more than half of their support from you during the academic year? At any time since you turned 13, were both your parents deceased? Were you in foster care, or were you a dependent or ward of the court? Has it been determined by court in your state of legal residence that you are an emancipated minor or someone other than your parent or step parent has legal guardianship? At the time, on or before July 1, were you determined to be an unaccompanied youth who was homeless or was self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? And there will be additional details regarding that definition on the FAFSA that you can view. An important note to consider is if you answer yes to any of these questions, we may require additional documentation to be provided in the financial aid office. So please think through the questions carefully and make sure you answer accurately. If you are a dependent student and need to report parental information, the information on this slide can be helpful. You should be reporting your legal parent, which are usually biological or adoptive parents or parents awarded by the state. These types of parents are usually the ones listed on your birth certificate. If parents are not married but living together, you would enter both parents' information. If a legal parent is widowed or was never married, you would only enter that single parent's information. If your parents are divorced or separated, you would put the information of the parent you live with most during the year. If that parent is remarried, you would also put the information related to your step-parent who lives in the household. You will need to know the dates of marriages, divorce, or separation if applicable, and birth dates as seen on this slide. This slide provides information regarding who is not considered a parent for FAFSA purposes. We know all families are different, but for the purposes of the FAFSA, these individuals, even if you live with them, cannot be added to the FAFSA in the parent section. They are widowed step-parent, grandparents, foster parents, legal guardian, older siblings, and aunts and uncles. The only way these individuals are considered a parent for FAFSA purposes is if you have legally been adopted by that individual. All the information that is collected on the FAFSA is used to determine a student's EFC, or expected family contribution. This number is used by the financial aid office to determine each student's eligibility for federal grants and loans. It can also be used to determine state aid and institutional scholarship eligibility. As was mentioned in previous slides, sometimes additional information may be needed in order to complete FAFSA processing. So please keep an eye out on communications from your school's financial aid office. This slide includes some steps that will or may occur once the FAFSA is submitted. You will receive an email to the email address used on the FAFSA that includes what is called a Student Aid Report, or SAR. This document will include your EFC and give details about what that means, including federal grant eligibility. It is always a good idea to keep the SAR on file for future reference. Additionally, watch out for communication from the college's student financial aid office. Additional information may need to be collected. Typically, that is requested for students who need to complete a process called verification. FAFSA verification is a process implemented by the Federal Department of Education to ensure the accuracy of information reported on the FAFSA. Typically, about 20 to 30% of all students are selected for this process. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact the school you're planning on attending. Once the FAFSA is complete, the financial aid office will be responsible for finishing up the process, collecting additional documentation if needed, and awarding the financial aid in which you are eligible. This slide includes a list of common mistakes students make regarding their FAFSA. Probably the biggest mistake a student can make is to not file. By not filing, you may miss out on federal, state, and/or institutional funds. Some of these things are available even without a significant amount of financial need, so it's always a good idea to file a FAFSA. As Molly mentioned, FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid and should be submitted at FAFSA.gov. A telltale sign that you are on the wrong site is if it asks you to pay money. Filing the FAFSA, as the name indicates, is always 100% free. And to reiterate what Molly said, you should always attempt to file your FAFSA as soon as possible once it is available every October 1st that you are continuing your education. There are forms of aid that are limited and given on a first come, first served basis, and that is why it's so important to complete your FAFSA as soon as possible. Plus, it will ensure that aid is awarded in plenty of time before the school year begins. And since additional documentation could be needed, early filing gives both the student and the school plenty of time to ensure everything is settled before a bill is due. And finally, signing the FAFSA form is very, very important. The FSA ID is crucial to finishing your FAFSA. You should get it, as Molly mentioned, before you start the process, and be sure to use both your and your parents' FSA ID if you are a dependent student. If you do not use it as a signature, your FAFSA will be rejected and unable to be processed further. We know that the FAFSA can seem like a daunting task, but it is a very important step in preparing for college. There are many people who can help, including our financial aid office. You can email us at jefferson-financialaid@kctcs.edu, and our KCAC representatives are always there to help as well. Here's their website where you can go to request additional information and an appointment to have one-on-one help with the FAFSA. Don't ever hesitate to ask us for help, and thank you and good luck.